The winter wind screamed through the narrow street, lifting curtains of dust and snowflakes that stung the skin like needles. Eli Carter kept to the shadows behind the saloon, crouched low against the biting cold, his bare feet raw and purple. A torn army blanket hung from his shoulders, more holes than fabric, but it was all he had. He poured through a dented trash barrel, fishing out a crust of bread so hard it might break a tooth. Across the muddy street, a sudden commotion cut through the howling wind. Eli looked up in time to see an old native man, hair long and streaked with gray, draped in worn buckskin, stumble under the shove of a drunken settler. Laughter followed. A second man kicked the elder in the ribs, sending him sprawling into the snow. Eli froze, his heart beat loud in his ears. He could walk away. He should walk away. But something inside him, something older than reason, something tied to a promise made long ago, pushed him forward. Before the thought had even settled, Eli had crossed the street. He slammed into the nearest attacker, his skinny frame thrown forward with all the force he could muster. The blow earned him a savage punch to the jaw. He tasted blood, stumbled, and took another hit to the gut. The crowd of settlers jeered, boots crunching on frozen ground as they formed a loose circle. The lead aggressor, a tall man with a scar under one eye, pulled a revolver from his belt and leveled it at Eli's head. No one stepped in. No one called for mercy. The cold wind howled on. Long before that moment, the seeds of violence had been sown. After the Civil War, the frontier was a restless, broken place. Soldiers returned to towns that no longer wanted them, land was seized, treaties with native tribes were inked and broken in the same breath. Orphans and widows wandered from camp to camp, living off scraps and kindness where they could find it. Native elders sometimes ventured into these towns to trade goods, but every trip was a gamble. A wrong word, a suspicious glance, and they could find themselves facing fists, knives, or worse. Eli was no stranger to that danger. He had been drifting since he was 12, when his family's wagon train was ambushed on the prairie. His father had fought to the last breath, shoving Eli into a ditch and shouting words that would burn into him forever, "Protect those who cannot protect themselves." That day, Eli had lived, but at a cost, a weight of guilt that pressed on him like a stone in his chest. His mother's last gift, a silver pocket watch, had been shattered in the chaos. He still carried it, cracked glass and all, a tether to a life that had ended too soon. The revolver's barrel gleamed under a weak shaft of winter sunlight. Eli could feel the cold metal in his mind before it even touched his skin. The scar-faced man's breath steamed in the air as his finger curled around the trigger. Somewhere behind Eli, a bottle slipped from a bystander's hand and rolled toward him. Without thinking, Eli snatched it up, swung it in a desperate arc, and shattered it against the man's forearm. The crack of breaking glass rang out like a gunshot. The aggressor staggered, cursing, but didn't drop the revolver. Around them, boots shifted in the snow, eager for blood. The air was sharp with gun oil and smoke from the saloon's chimney. Eli's chest rose and fell in quick bursts, his eyes locked on the man's, waiting for the shot. Enough. The sheriff's voice cut through the tension. He stepped into the circle, his badge catching the light. The crowd loosened just enough for the revolver to lower, but not enough for the malice to fade. The sheriff didn't look at Eli. He didn't look at Wounded Hawk. He simply told the men to take their trouble elsewhere and walked away. The scar-faced man spat in the snow and holstered his weapon. "You ain't worth a bullet, boy," he muttered, shoving past. Eli straightened, ribs aching, the bottle's jagged neck still in his hand. Across from him, the elder rose slowly, brushing snow from his shoulders. His dark eyes studied Eli, deep and unreadable. They stood there a moment, two strangers bound only by the moment they had just survived. Eli stepped forward, offered his arm. Wounded Hawk accepted it without a word, steadying himself. The elder's grip was surprisingly strong, and for a heartbeat, Eli thought he saw a flicker of approval in the man's gaze. They couldn't speak the same language, but it didn't matter. Eli nodded once, and the elder returned it. From the folds of his coat, Wounded Hawk withdrew a small carved feather, its edges smoothed by years of touch. He pressed it into Eli's hand, curling the boy's fingers around it. The gesture was slow, deliberate, not just a gift, but a mark of something unseen. Eli didn't know what it meant. Not yet. The elder turned and walked away, his figure swallowed by drifting snow. Eli stood in the street, the talisman warm in his palm despite the cold, unaware that this small act of defiance had already set something in motion, something that would change his life before another sun could rise. Eli woke to the sound of thunder. Not from the sky, but from the earth itself. Hoofbeats, steady and unbroken, rolled through the frozen ground beneath him. He pushed himself up from the cot in the livery's corner, rubbing frost from his eyelashes. Outside, pale morning light spilled between the warped boards, dust drifting in slow spirals. When he stepped into the street, the sight froze him in place. From the horizon came a wall of movement, 100 riders, their silhouettes rising from the haze. Hooves pounded in unison, kicking up clouds of snow and dirt. The warriors' faces were painted in streaks of red and black, their breath steaming in the cold. Feathers trailed from their hair, spears and rifles glinting in the light. The town reacted like a body struck. Doors slammed. Rifle barrels jutted from second-story windows. Mothers pulled children inside by the arm. Somewhere, a dog barked and then whimpered quiet. Eli's breath caught as the riders drew closer. They moved like one living thing, until the column split down the center and flowed into the heart of the town. At the front, mounted on a bay horse with a scar across its flank, rode Wounded Hawk. The elder sat tall, the wind pulling at his hair, his gaze steady as it swept over the townsfolk. Behind him, a man with a beaded breastplate and an eagle feather at his temple dismounted. The war chief's boots landed heavy in the snow. He strode toward Eli, the air between them thick with silence. The man stopped an arm's length away, studying Eli with eyes that held neither warmth nor threat, just wait. The chief spoke in his own tongue, words rolling low and measured. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eli caught only fragments, a name, a gesture, but the meaning was clear enough in the way the settlers' hands tightened around their rifles. They thought this was a call for retribution. But then the chief's tone shifted, and he extended his arm, palm open. The meaning sank in slowly, an invitation. For a long moment, Eli stood caught between two worlds, the one that had starved and beaten him, and the one that now offered a seat at its fire. He thought of nights curled in barns, the stink of wet hay in his nose, praying rats didn't find him. Of mornings gnawing at bread so hard he'd chipped a tooth. He thought of watching families pass him by without a glance, as if he were a shadow. The offer carried danger, maybe even death, but it carried something else, too. A purpose. A place where his name might mean more than a mouth to feed. Eli swallowed hard, nodded once, and stepped forward. The chief's hand closed over his, firm and unyielding. A murmur rose from the warriors, like wind in tall grass. Without a word, Eli climbed onto the back of a waiting pony. They left the town behind in a slow, steady march. The land beyond the last fence post was raw and unrelenting. The warriors moved through it as if born from the snow itself, but Eli felt every bite of the wind like a knife. They crossed frozen rivers that cracked beneath their weight, the water whispering below. Nights were spent under an ocean of stars, the cold pressing into his bones no matter how close he huddled to the fire. By the third night, Eli could no longer feel his toes. His breath came in shallow gasps, teeth chattering beyond control. His hands trembled when he tried to tie his bedroll. He knew the signs, he'd seen men in worse winters fall asleep and never wake. A shadow moved beside him. Red Hawk, a young warrior, barely older than Eli, his expression unreadable, knelt without a word. He pulled Eli's hands into his own, rubbing them briskly until sensation clawed its way back. Then he draped a fur-lined blanket over Eli's shoulders, pressing it down with a firm nod. The next day, when they forded a waist-deep river, Red Hawk stayed at Eli's side, gripping his arm when the current threatened to take him. They never spoke. Words were unnecessary. In the days that followed, Red
Hawk began to show Eli things, not in lessons or lectures but in quiet acts. When Eli wandered too far from camp, Red Hawk pointed to the ground, showing him the shallow, delicate imprint of a rabbit's paw in snow. When hunger gnawed at them both, Red Hawk taught him to set a snare from twisted sinew and a bent sapling. One morning, as they hiked through tall grass rimed with frost, Eli stepped forward and froze at Red Hawk's sudden hand on his chest. The young warrior crouched, parted the grass, and revealed the coiled body of a rattlesnake, its cold tongue flicking at the air. He didn't kill it, just guided Eli around, never breaking stride. At night, Red Hawk sometimes slid an extra strip of smoked meat into Eli's hand, pretending not to notice when Eli caught him. And once, when Eli's blanket tore in the wind, Red Hawk stitched it without being asked, the crude threadwork warm against Eli's back when the next gust came. In the silence between them, trust was taking root. Not loud, not obvious, but deep. The warning came at dusk. 2 scouts rode in hard, their ponies lathered, eyes sharp with urgency. Around the fire, murmured talk died instantly. The younger of the 2 dismounted in a single motion, speaking in quick, clipped bursts. Eli didn't understand the words, but the tone carried the meaning well enough. Trouble. Through the translation of a warrior who knew some English, Eli learned what they'd seen. A group of armed settlers, 20 or more, moving fast toward the camp. They carried rifles and shotguns, riding under the pretense of justice, for wrongs that existed only in their minds. The warriors' eyes turned flinty. Men began checking rifle straps, sharpening blades, stringing bows. The quiet of the camp turned to purposeful motion. Even the horses felt it, snorting and shifting restlessly.
Elias tiest taittened.
He'd seen men like that before, not the type to negotiate, only to destroy. Snow began to fall that night, slow at first, then heavier, wrapping the camp in ghostly white. By dawn, the world was a blur of swirling flakes. The storm dulled the sound of hooves until they were almost on top of them. A shot cracked from the tree line, shattering the morning silence. Then another. The warriors answered with a volley of rifle fire, the gunshots muffled by the storm's roar. Eli found himself moving before he thought, crouched low behind an upturned sled, his hands raw from the cold gripping the stock of a borrowed rifle. Figures moved in and out of the white haze, shadows with guns. The settlers pushed in hard. One broke through the line, charging straight at Eli with a pistol drawn. The boy dropped the rifle, too slow, and swung the way he had back in town, a short, brutal jab to the man's jaw, followed by a shove that sent him sprawling. Eli scrambled for the pistol and fired into the air, the sound tearing through the snow. From the left came a scream, sharp, cut short. Eli turned to see a settler raising his rifle at him. There was no time to dodge. The crack of the shot came, but Eli felt no pain. Instead, he saw Red Hawk, just a few feet away, stagger back, the snow behind him blooming red. Red Hawk! Eli dropped the pistol and lunged, grabbing his friend under the arms. Bullets hissed past, chipping bark from the pines. He half-dragged, half-carried Red Hawk to the cover of a fallen log, his breath ragged, muscles burning. Warriors closed in around them, moving with a predator's precision. Arrows whispered through the storm. Gunfire cracked. Then, slowly, the tide shifted. The settlers faltered, realizing too late that they were surrounded. When the last shot faded, the snow was littered with the remnants of the fight. Broken arrows, spent casings, and dark stains melting into the drift. The settlers, what few remained standing, stumbled back into the trees, swallowed by the storm. Eli knelt beside Red Hawk, pressing a strip of cloth to the wound. "Stay with me," he muttered. Though he wasn't sure if Red Hawk could understand the words, the young warrior's eyes held steady on his, the faintest nod given before his head rested back against the snow. By nightfall, Red Hawk was bandaged and resting. The camp gathered in a great circle around the council fire, its flames leaping high into the black sky. Wounded Hawk sat across from Eli, his gaze unblinking, the talisman's shadow flickering on his chest. Through a translator, his words carried over the crackle of the flames. Bravery was not born of blood, nor skin, nor the place you came from. It was born of the heart. The warriors' voices rose in agreement, a deep, resonant hum that filled the air. Eli felt something shift inside him, solid and sure. For the first time, he believed the words. For the first time, he felt more than just a boy drifting between places. He felt like someone who could stand his ground. And yet, he knew he couldn't stay. The camp was safe for now, but his presence might draw trouble again. His fight was his own, and he couldn't risk another war on their land. At first light, the frost still clinging to every branch, Red Hawk approached. His arm was in a sling, but his steps were steady. Without a word, he held out a bough, carved from ash wood, its grip wrapped in soft leather. Eli took it, feeling the weight, the care in its making. He tried to find the right words, but none came. Red Hawk simply nodded once, the smallest curve of a smile touching his lips. Eli slung the bough over his shoulder. The feather talisman was still in his hand, warm against his skin despite the cold. He turned toward the open plains, his boots crunching through the snow. Behind him, the camp faded into the white. A voice, the narrator's, seemed to rise from the wind itself. Courage is born when we choose to stand, even when the world turns away. What would you do? The fire's glow faded into darkness, and the sound of hoofbeats returned, pulling the audience toward the next untold story.